A shocking declaration rings out through the halls as someone announces they are breaking off their engagement. The forceful voice calls out specifically to Silviana Mercurini to immediately grab her attention. The crowd watches in anticipation as this highly awaited day finally arrives for the pair. Silviana internally rejoices at her newfound freedom and humbly accepts the shocking declaration. She gladly accepts the annulment of her engagement to Prince Christopher without a second thought. Prince Christopher stares back in utter confusion as her unexpectedly cheerful reaction completely catches him off guard. Christopher points out that normal people would be quite upset about being stripped of their crown princess title. Smiling brightly, Silviana admits she always hated the idea of marrying him and is grateful he proposed the annulment. Shocking the prince further, Silviana demands to hear the actual reason for breaking off their royal engagement. She notes that choosing the graduation ceremony of St. Adine Academy for the annulment must require a significant reason. Silviana challenges the royal to publicly condemn her for whatever it is she supposedly did wrong. The prince stammers in total surprise at her confident, unwavering confrontation. A frightened Katia timidly hides behind the prince's arm as the tension in the grand room rapidly escalates. Christopher boldly accuses Silviana of viciously bullying Katia. Realizing she is being framed for wrongdoing she has no memory of, Silviana resolves to aggressively fight back. Tears streaming down her face, Katia whimpers that Lady Silviana absolutely hates her. Silviana casually dismisses the accusation, revealing she has been actively preparing for this very day. She smoothly states she is far too busy a person to bother with such trivial, dramatic matters. The prince stubbornly insists she committed the act simply because she found Katia to be an eyesore. Silviana nonchalantly questions why she would even need to resort to such petty, unnecessary actions. She points out that Katia, being a healing magic practitioner, could simply cast healing magic on herself. Silviana ruthlessly mocks Katia's shamelessness in wearing bandages despite her supposed magical abilities. Christopher specifically claims Silviana aggressively pushed Katia down the stairs exactly a week ago. He indignantly asks what on earth she was doing when she mysteriously skipped school that day. A confident, knowing smile stretches across Silviana's face as she prepares her perfect counterattack behind her fan. Silviana reveals it was impossible for her to push Katia since she wasn't even at the academy a week ago. She triumphantly announces she was too busy digging radishes in the dungeon to bother with bullying. Christopher stands frozen in absolute shock at this completely ridiculous and unexpected revelation. Katia stares blankly, utterly perplexed by the sudden and bizarre mention of radishes. An enormous, radiant dungeon radish is dramatically envisioned before the stunned crowd to emphasize her point. Silviana eagerly explains that dungeon-grown vegetables taste better and are used in potions, leaving the prince baffled. The heavy silence stretches across the hall as the bewildered students helplessly process the absurd vegetable defense. Christopher angrily argues that students aren't allowed in dungeons and can't get adventurer licenses until graduation. Silviana swiftly counters that special exceptions exist for exceptional individuals like herself. Striking a heroic pose, she reveals her secret identity as the S-rank adventurer Sylvie Lini. She leans in closely and demands that the royal prince remember her formidable title well. Silviana proudly asserts that a busy S-rank adventurer clearly has no time for trivial villainy. While Christopher reels at her S-rank status, she points out that dungeon entry records will flawlessly prove her alibi. Declaring the atmosphere unbearable and the annulment mutual, she formally takes her leave from the ceremony. Without looking back, she sarcastically thanks Christopher for taking care of her, noting he never really did. With a dramatic flourish, Silviana bids a confident final farewell to Prince Christopher. The stunned prince stares helplessly as her magical exit unfolds right before his eyes. Gasps erupt from the shocked crowd as she vanishes completely through a glowing teleportation circle. The magical energy violently dissipates into the air, leaving absolutely nothing behind. A furious Christopher growls in utter frustration at her sudden and flawless escape. Katia calls out timidly just as a heavy thud unexpectedly echoes through the tense academy room. The entire grand hall instantly descends into a stunned, bewildered silence. Miles away, Silviana triumphantly celebrates completing the highly anticipated engagement annulment event. Exhausted from constantly monitoring her behavior and enduring forced social gatherings, she sighs in profound relief. She reflects proudly on enduring 18 restrictive years as a Mercurini and a grueling 10-year engagement. Frustrated by Christopher's blatant favoritism toward the game's protagonist Katia, she screams internally at her unfair treatment. Ignorant of her hardships, the infatuated prince constantly visits the academy solely to see Katia while entirely ignoring Silviana. She grimly acknowledges her doomed role as Silviana Mercurini, the designated villainess of this ridiculous world. The original in-game Silviana brutally bullies Katia and inevitably faces a gruesome execution at the story's climax. Nicknamed the woman who retired from humanity, Silviana even serves as the terrifying final boss in certain brutal routes. She recalls her past life playing Love Dungeon, a bizarre game blending academy romance with dungeon-crawling RPG mechanics. Remembering her previous life, she admits to finding the notoriously poorly designed game quite amusing. Making an immediate decision, Sylvie resolves to dodge the execution route and safely retire from her villainous role. Upon realizing her reincarnation on her 8th birthday, she quickly adapts to her new reality to her parents' immense shock. Blessed with incredible final boss specs, she demands rigorous training from her parents to maximize her immense potential. By dragging her somewhat troublesome parents into monster hunting, she effectively prevents their crimes and maintains a clean family name. She notes that her parents were originally supposed to be wildly corrupt villains involved in dark bribes and academy takeovers. Acting exceptionally kind at the academy to avoid triggering death flags, she secretly operates as a highly skilled adventurer. She triumphantly reveals a secluded house and sprawling farm purchased entirely with her own hard-earned adventuring money. Embracing her true identity as Sylvie Lini, she fully rejects a restrictive, miserable life as the prince's royal wife. Victorious at last, she boldly proclaims that today marks the successful culmination of her brilliant annulment plan. Basking in her glorious freedom, she eagerly anticipates the peaceful beginning of her long-awaited slow life. She excitedly imagines tilling vast fields, cooking her favorite delicious meals, and happily raising a pet in a distant rural town. Before her reincarnation, her ultimate but tragically unfulfilled dream was to simply run an old-style cafe alongside her beloved sister. Her previous life ended in a forgotten tragedy as a severely overworked, overly accommodating corporate slave. Despite being reborn into a chaotic fantasy world, she fiercely vows to finally live exactly the peaceful life she desires. Clenching her fists with iron determination, she aggressively swears she will absolutely never become a tragic final boss. A sudden, massive magical distortion violently disrupts the peaceful, victorious atmosphere surrounding her. Arriving at her new home via teleportation circle, she is instantly shocked to find her mother casually waiting inside. Her mother playfully and loudly apologizes for the sudden intrusion into her daughter's newly claimed sanctuary. Crushing Sylvie's newfound liberation, her mother reveals that the deeply dissatisfied royal family is already summoning her back. Utterly defeated by the cruel twist of fate, a depressed Sylvie reluctantly agrees to return to the royal capital. The prestigious Mercurini ducal family stands proudly as a fierce martial lineage renowned for gathering immensely skilled adventurers. Greeting her parents in an extravagant, battle-ready dress, Sylvie grimly realizes her path to a slow life will be devastatingly difficult. Her furious parents angrily declare Prince Christopher's public annulment utterly unforgivable as they aggressively plot their next dramatic move. Preparing for a tense royal confrontation, Silviana's mother verifies that the mysterious item they discussed is completely ready. Her mother laments their impending separation despite acknowledging that Silviana purchased a remote farm precisely for this annulment. Exuding quiet confidence, Silviana firmly confirms her preparations are absolutely complete. She reveals she meticulously orchestrated these countermeasures for this exact scenario regardless of the prince's outrageous claims. A determined glint flashes in her eyes as she promises this chaotic matter will be settled swiftly. Imposing royal guards stand at rigid attention as the immense palace doors loom before the supposedly disgraced noblewoman. A grand announcement echoes through the tension-filled hall to herald Silviana Mercurini's highly anticipated arrival. Feigning polite innocence, Silviana cheerfully claims she thought she was merely summoned to sign the final annulment papers. An enraged Prince Christopher aggressively barks that begging for forgiveness will never reverse his absolute annulment. He thrusts an accusatory finger toward her with explosive and uncontrolled royal fury. Slicing through the prince's outrage, a stern younger man steps forward and demands his older brother calm himself. Shooting Silviana a piercing glare, he furiously reprimands her for completely lacking respect for the royal family. Silviana silently identifies this fiercely protective youth as Edgar, Christopher's serious but impulsively rash younger brother. Absorbing Edgar's intense hostility, she logically accepts that she is currently viewed as the absolute enemy. She reflects that she barely knows the second Prince Edgar Belnium despite them actively sharing the same academy classes. Recalling the chaotic graduation, she inwardly cringes at the graduated Christopher shamelessly loitering around younger students to woo Katia. She remembers actively avoiding all male students to honor her engagement, leaving Edgar as merely an irrelevant background character. Edgar grudgingly admits his brother's public spectacle was flawed but vehemently condemns Sylviana's desperately dramatic retaliation. Cutting off any potential defense, the furious second prince aggressively commands her to spare them her pathetic excuses. Analyzing his explosive rage, Sylviana brilliantly deduces that something far deeper is driving his uncharacteristic hostility. The authoritative king shatters the bickering by roaring for silence while declaring they possess undeniable evidence of her wicked deeds. Attempting to defuse the volatile royal court, the weary queen gently urges caution against finalizing such a hasty annulment. Sylviana ruthlessly dismisses their supposed undeniable proof as nothing more than a pathetic pile of ruined trash. Christopher aggressively counters that a physically injured Katia explicitly named Sylviana as her vicious attacker. Holding her ground with iron resolve, Sylviana firmly reiterates that she was conquering a dangerous dungeon during the attack. Refusing to believe her wild alibi, Christopher mockingly demands actual proof of her absurd S-rank adventurer status. Accepting his arrogant challenge, Sylviana triumphantly produces a glowing time crystal to forcefully reveal the absolute truth. She silently notes that this incredibly rare magical recording device functioned as an extraordinarily expensive save item in her past life. Christopher dramatically recounts how the fiercely diligent Katia bravely transferred to the academy despite commoner struggles. The delusional prince aggressively accuses Sylviana of viciously shoving Katia into a freezing pond before his heroic rescue. Sylviana instantly crushes his lie by proving she attended as the honored student representative before immediately diving into a dungeon. Desperately shifting his attack, Christopher wildly claims a jealous rival maliciously shredded Katia's precious festival sheet music. A confident smirk dances across Sylviana's lips as she reveals she was ruthlessly overworked on the festival committee all month. As the frantic prince launches accusation after accusation, Sylviana effortlessly shatters each lie with perfectly recorded alibis. With brutal simplicity, she coldly announces that every piece of evidence completely contradicts Katia's pathetic fabricated timeline. Locking eyes with her pathetic former fiancé, Sylviana prepares to deliver the final psychological blow. She boldly and loudly declares that the foolish prince was entirely manipulated and deceived by Lady Katia. A horrified Christopher staggers backward as his entire romantic reality violently shatters around him. Narrowing his sharp eyes, a highly suspicious Edgar demands to know why she hoarded such astronomically expensive crystals. Flashing a dangerous smile, Sylviana smoothly compliments the second prince for possessing significantly more intellect than his foolish brother. Suspiciously eyeing the confident noblewoman, Edgar observes that she perfectly anticipated this exact chaotic scenario. Sylviana calmly explains that she flawlessly recorded every action to absolutely prevent being framed for baseless bullying. Standing tall and victorious, the vindicated Villainess radiates an untouchable aura of absolute confidence. She ruthlessly shatters their remaining leverage by revealing that the incredibly rare time crystal is actively recording this very royal meeting. Embracing her villainous title, Sylviana fiercely declares she absolutely refuses to face punishment for pathetic crimes she never committed. Desperately shifting the blame, a panicked Christopher frantically tries to accuse the manipulative Katia for his own disastrous downfall. Sylviana coldly condemns the foolish prince for abandoning royal dignity out of blind infatuation and engraving this wretched disgrace into palace history. Ignoring Edgar's furious protests, she ruthlessly questions why she should ever respect a man who humiliated her with such a public annulment. Her piercing glare utterly eviscerates the pathetic prince for shamelessly dallying with another woman while bound by a sacred royal engagement. With absolute disgust, she loudly brands his pathetic, unfaithful royal behavior as pure, unforgivable vulgarity. Turning her fierce gaze to the stunned monarch, Sylviana officially declares that this disastrous engagement must immediately be annulled. The heavily burdened king grips his throne in silent, overwhelmed despair as his son's foolish actions destroy the royal reputation. Stepping forward with terrifying authority, Duke Mercarini openly calls the future king pitiful and furiously refuses to forgive the insult to his daughter. As her fiercely loyal parents aggressively threaten to withdraw their allegiance, Silviana inwardly sweats at their terrifying villainous aura. Shocking the entire royal court, the bold noblewoman smoothly demands hefty financial reparations for the severe slander and sudden annulment. With a deceptively polite smile, she formally requests a massive compensation package from the utterly humiliated royal family. Pushed past his breaking point, an enraged Christopher violently screams at her to stop relentlessly mocking him. Explosive magical energy violently flares around the disgraced prince as he completely loses control of his boiling temper. A horrified Edgar frantically shouts at his older brother as the terrifying magical pressure rapidly builds within the throne room. Glaring with raw, murderous intent, the unhinged prince completely surrenders to his violent, destructive fury. Silviana casually analyzes the swirling flames, mockingly impressed that someone with such pathetic mana managed to conjure a decently large fireball. The terrified king and panicked second prince desperately scream for Christopher to halt his suicidal, treasonous magical assault. Unfazed by the blazing inferno, she tilts her head and casually asks what pathetic excuse he was trying to stammer out. A massive, blinding fireball violently erupts from the prince's hands and aggressively hurtles directly toward the fearless Villainess. Dismissing the blazing threat entirely, Silviana coldly mutters that his pathetic royal rage hardly matters at all. The entire throne room gasps in pure shock as Silviana effortlessly catches the roaring fireball with her bare hands. With a brutal, merciless grip, she aggressively crushes the condensed magical flames while Christopher groans in painful disbelief. Edgar stares in absolute, breathless horror as the supposedly weak noblewoman effortlessly controls the explosive, high-tier magic. Parting her lips, she casually and effortlessly blows the violently compressed magical flames completely away. The once terrifying fireball instantly dissipates into harmless, swirling embers that fade quietly into the tense throne room air. Completely mentally shattered by her overwhelming monstrous power, a pathetic Christopher weakly collapses to the hard stone floor. He gazes upward in paralyzing, absolute terror as the terrifying true power of the S-rank adventurer finally dawns on him. Summoning a massive, high-pressure water lance, Silviana aggressively blasts it right past the trembling prince's frozen face. Feigning helpless feminine distress, she mockingly whines about how terrifying it was to be nearly killed by the royal. Duke Mercarini smugly commands the king to admire her deliberate mercy, noting she could have instantly reduced the prince to pure ash. Dismissing her terrifying magical retaliation as mere playfulness, Silviana ruthlessly demands a massive increase to her final compensation. Utterly defeated and thoroughly terrified, the exhausted king weakly surrenders and desperately agrees to her outrageous financial demands. Miles away from the stressful palace, a joyous Silviana cheerfully declares it is time to eat in her peaceful new home. Savoring a delicious, warm breakfast, she happily celebrates the glorious, much-anticipated beginning of her leisurely slow life. Dressed in wonderfully simple clothes without agonizing ringlets or heavy gowns, she blissfully embraces the quiet freedom she always desperately desired. Waking to the cheerful chirping of countryside birds, Silviana peacefully welcomes the beautiful morning. Wondering how to spend her day, the joyful noblewoman excitedly plans to tend her garden and make fresh sushi. A sudden and persistent knocking aggressively shatters her peaceful morning routine. Peeking carefully outside, she wonders who could possibly be visiting her secluded home so early in the day. Panicking at the shocking sight, Silviana desperately tries to shut the door while loudly claiming the house is entirely vacant. Prince Edgar fiercely stops the door from closing and forcefully demands the bewildered Villainess open up immediately. Puzzled by the unexpected arrival of her ex-fiancé's younger brother, she bluntly asks what he possibly needs to apologize for. Assuming the royal compensation settled everything, Silviana is completely blindsided when the serious prince sincerely apologizes. The earnest royal deeply regrets his hostile behavior the previous day, acknowledging it was completely inappropriate toward a wronged woman. Silviana stares in utter disbelief, completely stunned that the royal traveled all this way just to deliver a simple apology. Quickly shifting his intense tone, Edgar fiercely reminds her that her blatant insolence toward the royal family remains entirely unforgivable. Narrowing his eyes with deep suspicion, the second prince aggressively interrogates her about whatever sinister plot she is secretly hatching. Amused by his rapid and extreme mood swings, Sylviana playfully notes that he is absolutely nothing like his foolish older brother. She inwardly admits to having a bit too much fun dramatically playing the evil villainous role during the explosive annulment. Leaning in closer, Edgar glares intensely at the bewildered noblewoman to establish his strict and unwavering authority. The stern prince firmly declares this land is his personal territory and he absolutely cannot let a dangerous person roam unchecked. Sweating nervously, Sylviana forcefully feigns ignorance and wildly claims her presence in his domain is just a massive coincidence. Edgar coldly points out that anyone genuinely seeking exile would logically choose land completely disconnected from the royal crown. Horrified by her own massive oversight, Sylviana realizes she accidentally purchased property directly tied to the second prince. A map illustrates her detached countryside estate of Uldi sitting squarely under the jurisdiction of the Kingdom of Belnium. A heavy and awkward silence aggressively falls as Sylviana furiously processes this devastating complication to her peaceful escape. Refusing to drop his intense suspicions, Edgar seriously asks if she is meticulously plotting a grand and treasonous rebellion. Furiously defending herself, Sylviana angrily shouts that she is the actual victim of the cruel annulment and the vicious attempted murder. Shocking her once again, the earnest royal humbly bows his head in immediate and genuine contrition. Stammering slightly, Edgar quickly agrees that his baseless treason accusations were completely out of line and highly inappropriate. Confused by her bizarre and seemingly innocent behavior, the prince thoroughly questions her stated ultimate dream of living a slow life. Sylviana closely observes his disarming honesty as he carefully processes her incredibly mundane and peaceful aspirations. Smiling gently, she firmly denies any dark schemes and reveals her only true wish is to till fields and cook homegrown vegetables. Edgar stares back with a deeply distrustful expression, remaining completely unconvinced by her innocent farmyard dreams. Exasperated by his relentless and stubborn suspicion, Sylviana brutally slams the heavy wooden door right in his shocked face. Desperately trying to end the chaotic conversation, she yells for him to leave while promising she fully accepts his royal apology. Edgar frantically yells for her to wait just as the exhausted noblewoman heavily leans against the firmly locked door. A swirling teleportation circle violently activates outside as the rejected prince forcefully departs her peaceful property. The very next day brings another ominous knock as a highly suspicious Sylviana cautiously approaches the front door. Opening the door to find the relentless prince standing there again, she sarcastically thanks him for forcing her royal palace return. Edgar stubbornly insists that no duke's daughter would ever truly want to farm and demands she reveal the absolute truth. Sighing in profound and heavy defeat, Sylviana forcefully pushes the front door wide open to face her persistent royal stalker. Accepting his deeply annoying presence, she coolly invites him to carefully watch her begin constructing her massive agricultural field. Stepping into the sprawling empty lot, Sylviana excitedly lists the endless varieties of crops and vegetables she desperately wants to cultivate. A bewildered Edgar states one person can't manage such a vast field as she enthusiastically rattles off fruit names. Revealing her mysterious agricultural arsenal, Sylviana proudly displays the rare seeds and tubers she meticulously extracted from the treacherous dungeon. She confidently explains to a bewildered Edgar that cultivating highly resilient dungeon-grown vegetables provides the absolute best foundation for her massive farm. Detailing the lucrative but demanding process, she notes that while these highly nutritious plants fetch premium prices, their inability to reproduce above ground requires constant and dangerous dungeon expeditions for fresh saplings. Raising her hand with absolute authority, Sylviana dramatically summons forth her first magical ally by commanding Aqua to immediately appear. She silently critiques the bizarre agricultural mechanics of this world system while simultaneously praising its highly convenient and beginner-friendly design. Pointing directly towards the empty soil, the determined noblewoman actively initiates her grand farming operation by demanding a massive influx of fresh water. Edgar gasps in pure, unadulterated shock as an incredibly rare and powerful water spirit violently materializes right before his very eyes. Floating gracefully in the air, the ethereal spirit affectionately addresses her master and cheerfully asks for her very next command. Completely unfazed by the miraculous magical summoning, Sylviana casually praises the entity and immediately pivots to her next crucial step. She decisively commands Aqua to rapidly purify the nearby well water as the eager elemental swiftly and obediently complies. Another distinctly powerful voice violently echoes across the open field as a second mystical entity respectfully answers its supreme master's call. A massive, hulking figure of earth powerfully erupts from the ground as Sylviana joyfully greets the mighty spirit Terra. As she boldly commands the giant to permanently enrich the soil for maximum crop yield, a completely mind-blown Edgar screams at the impossible sight of a legendary earth spirit. Frantically waving his hands in total disbelief, the horrified prince screams at her to explain how she impossibly contracted two mythical spirits simultaneously. He desperately stammers that while mages can bind spirits aligned with their own element, successfully contracting two notoriously difficult major elementals like water and earth defies all known magical logic. Brushing off his absolute panic with a casual wave, the terrifyingly overpowered Villainess smirks as she prepares to casually shatter his reality even further. With a simple, effortless gesture, she violently conjures a swirling vortex to summon Ventos, the legendary spirit of wind. Following instantly on the heels of the fierce gale, an explosive burst of raging flames violently announces the dramatic arrival of Ignis, the fire spirit. Delivering the ultimate magical flex, Sylviana casually drops the bomb that she has effortlessly bound all four major archspirits simply because it makes farming much more convenient. She politely apologizes to the fiercely loyal elemental lords for summoning them merely for introductions while they aggressively swear their eternal devotion to her. Without wasting a single second, she brutally commands the legendary fire spirit to quickly carry a basket of simple tubers across the dirt field. Watching the godlike magical beings happily perform mundane chores, a completely mentally shattered Edgar weakly echoes her casual remark regarding their absurd convenience. The four supreme archspirits eagerly buzz around the sprawling farm, instantly terraforming the barren soil into a perfectly manicured agricultural paradise. Comparing this terrifying spectacle to a normal peasant with a hoe, the horrified prince inwardly screams that taming four archspirits strictly for menial farm labor is entirely unprecedented madness. Staring at the legendary S-rank adventurer Sylviana, he desperately demands to know the actual, terrifying depths of her monstrous magical reserves. Defending her ridiculous overkill, she fiercely counters that she spent years enduring grueling royal adventurer commissions and now strictly reserves her immense magic to exclusively fuel her absolute dream of a lazy, slow life. Puzzled by her casual mention of royal orders, Edgar gasps in profound confusion as she shockingly name-drops his own highly powerful grandfather. Stepping closer, she finally reveals the highly classified secret that the abdicated former king personally ordered her to continuously delve into deadly dungeons. The absolute absurdity of the situation strikes Edgar anew as he hysterically questions the true and bizarre nature of the highest royal decree. She casually drops the massive bombshell that the former king granted her a special adventurer's license specifically so she could illegally harvest highly nutritious dungeon radishes for his elderly diet. Lamenting her secret and incredibly scandalous life as a duke's adventuring daughter, she admits the grueling top-secret royal fetch quests were pure hell despite the highly lucrative pay. Sylviana passionately explains the sheer, agonizing exhaustion of desperately balancing a triple life as a noble, student, and royal-serving adventurer behind everyone's backs. Emphasizing her tragic victimhood, she firmly states the sudden annulment abruptly ended everything and forced her to retire alone to the countryside since her furious parents allegedly banished her. Delivering a masterclass in emotional manipulation, she tragically asks the prince if it isn't entirely reasonable for a woman who lost her fiancé and family to simply desire a quiet life for herself. Completely falling for her brilliant act, a deeply guilt-ridden Edgar silently curses his royal family for pushing this supposedly helpless and homeless woman to the absolute brink. While Edgar gently urges her to rest and recover, Sylviana darkly smirks behind his back, fully knowing her terrifying parents merely sent her on a paid vacation and absolutely never disowned her. Feigning perfect innocent sincerity, she stares deeply into his eyes and politely asks if her heartfelt desire for a perfectly quiet life has finally convinced him of her total innocence. Completely defeated and overwhelmed by monumental guilt, the thoroughly manipulated second prince quietly surrenders and heavily turns to begin his long walk back to the palace. Watching the defeated royal finally leave her property, the triumphant Villainess cheerfully waves goodbye as she decisively secures her long-awaited absolute freedom. Reflecting on the original game's tragic waste of highly attractive character design, she laments that the incredibly popular and gorgeous Edgar was completely unromanceable and merely reduced to an irrelevant background prop. Questioning the prince's relentless meddling, Sylviana ponders his unusually stubborn behavior. Shaking off her thoughts, the joyful noblewoman excitedly declares her villainous role officially dead and fully embraces her new free life. Dismissing the entire chaotic royal ordeal, she completely surrenders to the peaceful countryside. The very next day brings fresh sunlight across her sprawling, beautifully empty farm. Refusing to be deceived by her innocent act, a deeply suspicious Edgar aggressively declares he still absolutely refuses to accept her story. Furious at his endless nagging, Sylviana aggressively orders the annoying prince to go back home. Edgar swiftly steps forward, forcefully halting her attempt to dismiss him. The stern royal declares he must strictly monitor such a highly dangerous individual on behalf of the crown. Pointing an accusing finger, Edgar fiercely promises to persistently visit her house until she decisively proves her absolute innocence. Clutching her head in extreme frustration, Sylviana furiously screams that his constant stalking is driving her completely insane. As the two relentlessly bicker back and forth, the frustrated prince outright refuses to leave a terrifying S-rank adventurer to roam freely. Turning her attention entirely back to the soil, Sylviana eagerly plans to plant potatoes and fix up an old chicken fence. She proudly surveys her peaceful property as her summoned magical spirits expertly maintain the deep well. Suddenly shattering her peaceful morning, an overly serious Edgar bluntly interrogates the startled Villainess about her daily itinerary. Completely ignoring his intense interrogation, Sylviana stretches out under the bright sky and cheerfully praises the perfect slow life weather. Glaring back at the stubborn royal, she violently complains about him ruining her peaceful morning yet again. She firmly announces she is finally heading into the nearby town of Aldi to officially register her move with the Adventurers Guild. Complaining bitterly, she specifically blames his daily stalking for severely delaying her essential town visit. Edgar coldly challenges her to magically teleport him away again if his constant royal presence truly bothers her so much. Sylviana dismisses the challenge, noting that aggressively drawing complex teleportation circles requires exhausting amounts of precious mana. Choosing a much simpler path, she happily declares she would much rather take a beautiful, leisurely spring walk into town. The mismatched pair sets off together down the peaceful dirt road leading away from her secluded farm. Realizing her stubborn determination, the exhausted prince quietly concedes to her peaceful travel plans. Refusing to be left behind, an indignant Edgar stubbornly promises to walk the full 20 minutes without a single royal complaint. A bustling stall vendor loudly announces a fresh, sizzling hot dog as the pair finally enters the lively town. The rural border town of Aldi violently thrums with energetic merchants and incredibly cheerful locals. Biting deeply into the fluffy bread and juicy meat, Sylviana aggressively savors the absolute bliss of pure street food. Tears of overwhelming joy well in her eyes as she passionately devours the highly anticipated snack. A thoroughly exasperated Edgar loudly scolds her for immediately getting distracted by food instead of properly visiting the guild. Completely ignoring the prince's nagging, she eagerly grabs yet another freshly cooked sausage from the laughing vendor. She happily swallows the delicious food, utterly entranced by her new peaceful lifestyle. Flashing a radiant smile, Sylviana fiercely declares that one must never rush the perfect slow life. Friendly townsfolk immediately swarm the powerful adventurer, warmly welcoming her as a permanent citizen of Aldi. Excited local warriors aggressively crowd around her, desperately begging the legendary S-rank fighter to join their next dangerous dungeon party. Basking in their immense adoration, she happily accepts their eager requests with a confident, reassuring smile. Even ordinary parents eagerly beg the immensely famous adventurer to protect their young children on their upcoming first dungeon dives. A deeply shocked Edgar watches the massive crowd, whispering that her heroic adventurer persona is wildly more famous than her hidden royal status. He rapidly realizes that housing an unimaginably rare S-rank adventurer guarantees the entire town will treat her with overwhelming respect and awe. Glancing over her shoulder, Sylviana softly notes the highly annoying extra tagalong trailing silently behind her. Smiling at the bustling streets, she proudly declares that this perfectly comfortable town is the absolute best place for her long-awaited retirement. A voice enthusiastically welcomes Sylvie upon her arrival. She arrives at the imposing, multi-story Adventurers Guild building. The guild master stammers in sheer disbelief at the person accompanying her, who casually greets him. The flustered master apologizes profusely for his lack of hospitality, confirming he recognizes the second prince. Prince Edgar greets the shocked master with casual politeness alongside a smiling Sylvie. Sylvie complains that the prince is suspiciously following her after she was cut off from the royal family and moved into his territory. To avoid causing a massive uproar, Sylvie sloppily decides they should just disguise the royal as a rookie adventurer. Edgar formally bows his head, humbly asking to be in the master's care despite the awkwardness. Edgar modestly admits that despite his academy training, he is practically a beginner. The master reflects on his initial shock from 3 years ago when the Duke's only daughter debuted as an adventurer. Sylvie confirms that the master has known her true aristocratic identity for the 3 years she has been under his care. The Duke Mercarini lineage is famous for its martial eccentricity, starting with a royal who became an outrageous adventurer. Sylvie's mother was a formidable commoner renowned in battle as the blood-stained Saintess. Her father fell for the Saintess at first sight and relentlessly courted her on the battlefield until she finally yielded. Sylvie admits her family is eccentric since most nobles with abundant mana enter public service rather than the savage adventuring work. When asked if she is truly retiring, Sylvie explains she only adventured to earn quick money and prefers a peaceful life. She proudly declares she has finally secured enough funds to peacefully run her own farm. Radiating pure joy, she proclaims that her long-cherished slow life has officially begun. To prove her innocence, she had casually purchased a massive, prohibitively expensive hoard of time crystals. Edgar reels in absolute shock realizing she earned enough for a vast farm's upkeep in merely 3 years. The pampered prince grabs his head in utter disbelief at the sheer amount of dangerous labor she must have endured. Sylvie curiously questions the sweating, muttering prince who quickly stammers a denial. He mentally notes the astronomical sum she earned was made even more insane by the fact she was balancing her studies. The narrative details the terrifying nature of a stampede where monsters multiply uncontrollably due to a mysterious trigger. Sylvie casually offers to lend her immense strength if something like a stampede ever occurs. Edgar is completely flabbergasted that she treats perilous S-rank adventuring as a mere side job. The prince sweat drops at her unbelievable claims, realizing her extraordinary power could easily topple nations. Watching her beam with innocent joy, Edgar paranoidly concludes she must be secretly scheming something massive. Their conversation is abruptly cut off as the master rushes to investigate a sudden commotion outside. The guild master peers through the window as chaotic shouts ring out from the uproar in the plaza below. Sylvie instantly sprints into the crowded, panicking plaza, followed closely by Edgar. A sobbing woman begs Sylvie to hurry and save her son Han. The frantic mother explains that her freshly licensed son foolishly entered a dungeon completely alone without an escort. An adventurer nearby scolds the foolishness of novices entering dungeons without veteran escorts. A surviving party member reveals that the boy is trapped and entirely surrounded by monsters. The veteran laments that this deadly situation is exactly what happens when novices overestimate their own strength. He grimly notes that while passing the license test is easy, surviving real combat is a completely different matter. The crying mother stammers out that her son ventured into the perilous southern forest dungeon. Sylvie immediately accepts the rescue mission, telling the others to formally lodge the request with the guild. Onlookers gasp in horror, questioning why a novice would go to the exact place where the region's strongest monsters appear. Realizing resurrection implies death, Sylvie decides they must hurry since her resurrection magic is completely unavailable. Edgar violently grabs Sylvie's shoulder, calling it pure madness to charge into immediate danger completely unarmed. Radiating confidence, Sylvie brushes off his frantic concern and insists she has the treacherous situation handled. Reluctantly resorting to a teleportation circle, she powerfully brandishes a sturdy iron farming tool. Stunned by her bizarre choice of weapon, the prince questions how she could possibly fight with a simple hoe. Ignoring his utter disbelief, Sylvie urgently declares that every single second counts in this life-or-death crisis. Activating the intricate magic circle, a blinding flash of energy instantly envelopes them to bridge the vast distance. Yielding to her reckless resolve, Edgar stubbornly declares he is coming along for the dangerous rescue mission. Secretly determined, the prince vows to uncover her hidden plots and witness her true adventuring capabilities. A massive surge of teleportation magic rockets them violently through space in a dazzling visual display. Materializing at their remote destination, the teleportation circle crackles fiercely before dissipating into thin air. They find themselves standing immediately before the ominous, gaping maw of the dangerous ancient ruins. Eyeing the dark entrance, Sylvie notes this is the exact dungeon where they must quickly recover the fledglings. Plunging into the cavern's depths, the dynamic duo navigates the eerie, dimly lit stone corridors. The dungeon reveals itself as a mystical trial wrought by Goddess Aiding, brimming with ancient magical power. Shocking Edgar completely, Sylvie casually notes this dry floor is much better than the slippery dungeon she braved at 10 years old. Sweating nervously, Edgar admits this is his very first time entering a real dungeon outside of controlled academy training. Reminiscing fondly, Sylvie recalls her brutal childhood where her parents tossed her into dungeons with only a knife. Horrified by her tales of actual resurrection, Edgar realizes her mother's flawless healing magic removed all limits on her deadly training. Addressing the eerie silence, Sylvie casually explains that the monsters aren't hiding but are actually physically unable to emerge. Still bewildered by the empty halls, Edgar questions if it is truly normal for a perilous dungeon to lack any monsters. Sylvie reveals she is radiating the intimidation skill, completely paralyzing all low-level monsters with pure fear. Flabbergasted, Edgar screams that intimidation is a devastating boss-level spell and not a casual convenience. Observing his tense posture and hand on his sword, she compliments his flawless adherence to basic adventuring fundamentals. Confronting his lingering doubts head-on, Sylvie smirks and admits he was entirely right to be suspicious of her monstrous power. A heavy, foreboding silence falls between them as the weight of her unbelievable true strength settles in the dark corridor. Suddenly piercing the tension, a terrified scream echoes through the cave, prompting them to sprint rapidly forward. They arrive to find a bloodied novice violently pinned and overwhelmed by a massive horde of vicious monsters. The monstrous pack snarls hungrily, their razor-sharp claws digging mercilessly into the defenseless boy. Barely clinging to life, the severely injured adventurer groans in sheer agony under the crushing weight of the beasts. Desperation radiating from his tear-filled eyes, the battered novice chokes out a weak, pathetic plea for help. Hiding strategically in the shadows, Sylvie sharply commands Edgar to stay perfectly still as they assess the unbelievable swarm. Analyzing the grim situation, she coldly states that these feral, mindless creatures view humans as nothing more than prey. Testing his knowledge, Sylvie asks the prince how monsters think, to which he correctly guesses it relies purely on eating instincts. Formulating a reckless plan, she shouts a sudden, commanding roar for everyone to close their eyes for 5 seconds. Exploiting their base instincts, she explains that the monster's attention will instantly shift if something far more enticing appears. Unleashing a massive burst of magical allure, Sylvie boldly casts the potent charm spell to captivate the entire horde. Hypnotized by the overwhelming magical aura, the beasts instantly release the boy and snap their heads toward her. Completely enthralled by the spell, the ravenous pack wildly stampedes directly towards Sylvie's isolated location. As Edgar panics at her seemingly suicidal solo stand, she smirks, grips her iron tool, and boldly declares she isn't alone. Summoning her immense magical power, Sylvie fiercely calls upon the elemental spirits Ignis and Ventos. Commanding them with absolute authority, she orders the elemental beings to burn everything in sight down to ash. Dumbfounded by her sheer audacity, Edgar watches her casually lecture the bickering spirits in the middle of a life-or-death crisis. Unleashing their combined fury, the spirits instantly detonate a massive swirling inferno of fire and wind. Screaming in sheer agony, the monstrous horde is completely engulfed by the devastating elemental blast. Checking the trembling survivors, Edgar loudly confirms the battered adventurers are secured and still breathing. Commanding her spirits to go all out, Sylvie fiercely vows to personally slaughter any beasts that slip past the flames. Charging fearlessly into the fray, she violently swings her heavy iron hoe to crush the remaining monsters. Clinging to his fading consciousness, the rescued novice weakly stammers out his profound relief. Moving with lethal precision, Sylvie mercilessly obliterates every single creature standing in her destructive path. Shattering its bones upon impact, she violently launches a snarling beast directly into the cavern wall. Brushing off their tearful apologies, she smoothly reassures the groaning adventurers that their gratitude is entirely enough. Disintegrating into the air, the decimated monsters leave behind a glittering shower of valuable magic stones. Awestruck by the instant massacre, the novices watch as Sylvie casually notes the high quality of the resulting magic stones. Pivoting her attention, she sternly lectures the foolish novices that true adventurers must strictly judge their own combat abilities. Ordering the water spirit Aqua to heal their wounds, She fiercely commands the group to completely redo their basic training. Staring in absolute reverence, the injured boy suddenly realizes she is the legendary S-rank adventurer Sylvie Lini. Flashing a reassuring smile, she confidently tells the battered novices they can always rely on her immense strength. Trembling with pure awe, the rescued party silently acknowledges that she is undeniably the real deal. Witnessing her casually dismantle the deadly threat, Edgar finally admits there is absolutely no doubt left regarding her terrifying power. Materializing in a gentle splash, the water spirit Aqua playfully begins mending the novice's horrific injuries. Teleporting safely away from the carnage, the exhausted rescue party finally materializes back in the bustling town. Sobbing uncontrollably, the frantic mother tightly embraces Han while tearfully screaming her profound thanks to Sylvie. Stepping forward with a dark scowl, the guild master angrily prepares to severely reprimand the foolish beginners. Furious at their lethal incompetence, he violently scolds the group for nearly getting reduced to bloody scraps of meat. Shaking with deep regret, the terrified novices frantically promise they will never pull such a suicidal stunt ever again. Brushing off the heavy tension, Sylvie casually agrees to help but strictly reminds everyone that her farming always comes first. Promising to be incredibly strict, she agrees to personally escort them only after they pass their mandatory secondary training. Amused by her hidden kindness, Edgar notes her surprisingly caring nature while she awkwardly blames it on a bad habit. Gazing affectionately at the lively streets, she softly declares that this vibrant town is her true home now. Standing peacefully in the warm breeze, she quietly reflects on the serene life she has finally managed to build. Flashing a brilliantly genuine smile, she passionately vows to fiercely protect the town and its people. Caught entirely off guard by her pure intentions, Edgar stares silently at her deeply earnest expression. Shattering the sentimental atmosphere entirely, Sylvie suddenly groans aloud and aggressively complains that she is starving. Sitting outdoors at a bustling cafe, Edgar casually offers to buy her a meal as payback for the hot dog she bought him earlier. Staring blankly at the towering dessert placed before them, Sylvie curiously questions why he specifically ordered pancakes. Masking his true intentions, Edgar awkwardly insists he cannot afford to owe favors to someone he is actively monitoring. Deadpan and completely unimpressed, Sylvie accurately points out that the pampered prince clearly just wanted to eat the sweets himself. Taking a massive bite, she instantly hums in pure delight as the rich flavors explode across her taste buds. Blushing slightly at her innocent joy, Edgar quietly watches her savor the sweet reward after a chaotic day of battling monsters. Staring intently at the young adventurer, Edgar solemnly notes that with her overwhelming power she could easily overthrow an entire nation. Enjoying a peaceful drink, Sylvie gracefully accepts his sincere praise regarding her splendid combat performance in the dangerous dungeon. Unable to contain his burning curiosity, the prince boldly asks if she ever harbored a desire to violently kill his brother for hurting her. Completely shocked by the dark suggestion, Sylvie vehemently denies ever wanting to commit murder over something as shallow as personal hatred. Gazing thoughtfully into the distance, she admits she genuinely respected him as her fiancé until he completely neglected his duties for Lady Katia. Apologizing softly for his brother's foolish actions, Edgar listens intently as she notes they both radiated a heavy aura of mutual disdain. Staring at her hands, Sylvie solemnly declares that harming another person merely out of dislike would turn her into something entirely inhuman. A heavy, contemplative silence momentarily settles over the eccentric duo as they sit quietly beneath the bright and peaceful sky. Flashing a gentle and genuine smile, she firmly proclaims that she is not quite ready to retire her humanity just yet. Calling her utterly incomprehensible, Edgar stubbornly vows to keep watching her while she playfully complains about his excessive free time. Leaning in closer, the prince drops all formal titles and requests that she simply call him Edgar since they share the exact same age. Returning her gaze with a charming smile, he casually declares his firm intention to exclusively call her Sylvie from now on. Amused by his sudden declaration, Sylvie slyly points out that he had already started using her casual name halfway through their adventure. Caught completely off guard by her teasing observation, Edgar frantically stammers and nervously questions if such casual speech is strictly forbidden. Smiling warmly, Sylvie reassures him that his lack of typical royal aura makes it incredibly easy to treat him like a normal person. The narrative playfully notes that despite their rapidly deepening bond, the powerful pair usually spends all their time endlessly bickering. Shattering the tranquil peace of the afternoon, A sudden and blood-curdling scream of pure agony violently echoes across the farming property. Sprinting frantically to the chaotic scene, Edgar desperately demands to know what happened as he finds Sylvie collapsed on the dirt. Falling to her knees in sheer, utter despair, Sylvie hysterically cries out that her precious and carefully cultivated potato field has been completely ruined. Tearfully mourning her painstakingly planted seeds, she aggressively declares this a massive incident while Edgar deadpans that it is barely a minor issue. Heartbroken and absolutely devastated, she frantically lists all the mouth-watering potato dishes she had been eagerly planning to cook. Kneeling in the ruined soil, she grimly inspects the severe damage and accurately deduces that ravaging horned rabbits are the sole culprits. Trembling with a terrifyingly dark fury, she violently curses the feral pests since she planted those precious seeds barely half a month ago. Summoning Ignis with terrifying, absolute authority, Sylvie fiercely commands the blazing fire spirit to immediately track down the fuzzy culprits. Radiating a demonic aura of pure, murderous rage, she fiercely vows to violently butcher the rabbits and turn them into a hearty stew. Deploying Ventos as a crucial escort, she sternly orders the wind spirit to forcefully stop the fiery elemental from completely destroying the area. Watching the volatile elementals immediately begin screaming at each other, Edgar sweat drops at their sheer chaotic dysfunction. Staring blankly at the wildly unhinged spirits, the prince nervously questions if her powerful magical summons are always this remarkably erratic. Ignoring his valid concerns entirely, Sylvie casually turns to the royal and outright demands his immediate assistance if he has any free time. Startled by her sudden and brazen request, the prince visibly stiffens as she boldly interrupts his quiet observation of the scene. Teasing him relentlessly, she sharply points out that his supposed royal monitoring looks exactly like skipping vital government duties. Sighing heavily in sheer defeat, Edgar relents and asks what she needs, prompting her to demand his intense labor as engagement compensation. Outlining her brilliant defensive strategy, she excitedly explains they can construct a lethal electric fence using his raw lightning magic. Presenting a thick spool of metallic wire, she fiercely orders the royal to channel his destructive electrical currents directly into the metal. Edgar violently recoils in sheer, unadulterated shock upon realizing she casually intends to use priceless mithril wire for a basic farm fence. Scolding her terrible logistical logic, he angrily explains that stringing luxury mithril outside will instantly invite incredibly dangerous thieves. Pouting stubbornly, Sylvie absurdly argues that she just has extra mithril lying around, forcing Edgar to scream that normal households definitely do not. Locking eyes with her, Edgar gently but firmly warns her that she must exercise far more caution while living entirely alone as a young lady. Mentally noting she could easily slaughter any human robber with zero effort, Sylvie begrudgingly agrees to use standard wire instead. Blushing slightly at his unexpectedly genuine concern, she quietly marvels at the profound realization that the prince is actively worrying about her safety. Gazing thoughtfully, Edgar quietly watches Sylvie from afar with a deeply complex expression. The prince silently wonders if the powerful adventurer is simply too serious or just genuinely soft-hearted. A cheerful memory surfaces of a smiling Sylvie arriving happily to visit her father. Edgar nervously sweats, wondering if his previous crying trick worked a bit too effectively on her. A grim flashback reveals that even their prestigious ducal house has been forcibly roped into assisting with tedious government affairs. Rumors circulate that Prince Edgar spends his exhausting days on patrols and his nights completely buried in endless paperwork. With the royal palace still in complete chaos, officials are frantically scrambling to decide how to properly deal with Prince Christopher. Watching his grueling schedule, Sylvie sadly reflects that his terrifying overwork perfectly mirrors her own tragic past life. She worriedly notes that visiting her between his heavy guard rounds means the stubborn prince is pushing himself entirely too hard. Remembering her past ambitions, she recalls dreaming of a vibrant shop filled with handmade trinkets, local vegetables, and sweet pastries crafted alongside her sister. Brushing off her deep concerns, she shakes her head and wonders if she is simply overthinking his visibly exhausted state. In her previous life, she worked tirelessly at a regular corporate company strictly to fund her nighttime pastry school dreams. Edgar silently waits outside the property, his expression unreadable as the gentle wind quietly rustles his clothes. Checking his immediate surroundings, the prince realizes with a hint of growing confusion that Sylvie is unusually late. A massive, chaotic explosion suddenly erupts in the distance, violently sending thick dust and debris flying into the sky. Clenching his fists in sheer frustration, the prince bitterly remembers how he was previously unable to do anything but helplessly watch. Ventos frantically screams not to bring the ferocious horned rabbits closer while Ignis aggressively demands to burn them all to ashes against Sylvie's strict wishes. Staring at the ravaged soil, a devastated voice tragically cries out for the precious seed potatoes they worked so incredibly hard to plant. Drawing his sword with fierce newfound resolve, Edgar boldly declares that even as a novice adventurer, he will finally step up. Gripping his gleaming weapon tightly, the determined royal charges forward to confront the feral menace head-on. Roaring with absolute determination, the prince bravely challenges the beasts and violently vows to protect the vulnerable field. The vicious horned rabbits lunge aggressively, forcing Edgar to violently swing his heavy blade to deflect their swift, deadly attacks. Sylvie finally arrives on the scene, gasping in sheer, unadulterated shock at the massive mountain of defeated horned rabbits piled before her. Realizing Ignis was completely obstructed, she stares at the precise strike marks and asks in pure awe if Edgar defeated them all completely by himself. Praising his amazing combat skills, she excitedly plans to turn the beasts into hearty stew since monsters killed outside a dungeon predictably do not yield magic stones. Edgar pants heavily, thoroughly exhausted from the intense skirmish but visibly proud of his successful solo defense. Thrilled by the incredibly massive haul, Sylvie gleefully notes they can crush the excess horns into highly valuable potion ingredients. Flashing a brilliantly warm smile, she sincerely thanks the prince and confidently notes that nothing will dare approach her farm ever again. With a soft, dramatic rustle, she happily unveils a carefully prepared item she brought along to the battlefield. Beaming brightly at the tired royal, she enthusiastically declares that it is finally time for them to take a much-needed break. She gently advises the exhausted prince to eat and rest properly unless he foolishly prefers returning to the suffocating palace. Blushing deeply, Edgar asks if she made the massive two-person meal specifically for him, prompting her to defensively claim she just needed a taste tester. Smiling softly at her painfully obvious excuse, the royal gratefully accepts the heartwarming invitation to share the meal. They sit together peacefully on the grass, enjoying a quiet, intimate moment of respite amid the lingering chaos of the rabbit attack. Leaning in closer with a suddenly serious expression, Sylvie softly calls out Edgar's name. Devouring the delicious food eagerly, Edgar heavily praises the meal while she beams and joyfully declares that garden lunches are the absolute best. Catching him completely off guard, she suddenly suggests that he should just start doing his tedious government work directly from her house. Pointing accusingly at his extremely tired face, she strictly forbids him from collapsing from overwork and fiercely demands to know if he is sleep-deprived. She firmly states that since he stubbornly decided to keep watching her, she won't even bother trying to stop his presence anymore. Stunned that she knows about his secret night shifts, Edgar listens in shock as she practically offers her quiet workshop so he can use his monitoring time highly effectively. Presenting an incredibly rare spatial storage magic tool, the user marvels at a bag where you can stuff anything in endlessly. A person casually offers this luxurious extra bag to a wildly stunned recipient. Sylvie happily offers Edgar this valuable bag to carry documents, making him yell in shock at her casual handling of such an extremely rare artifact crafted by spatial magic artisans. Stretching her arms wide in front of her home, Sylvie cheerfully declares this to be her version of a slow life. To call it even, she confidently orders him to help out with the farm work. Amused by her sudden boldness, Edgar bursts into genuine, bright laughter. Slightly flustered, Sylvie admits his outrageous nature simply makes her laugh. Smiling softly, Edgar tells her she should be getting used to it by now, mentioning his elder brother Will was under a curse. A solitary figure sits slumped and isolated in a dimly lit, barred room. Edgar and Sylvie sit together outside, completely unaware of the immense charm possessed by the existence of Sylvie Lini. Sylvie stares blankly ahead with wide, attentive eyes. Nimble hands carefully work with specialized tools at a crafting table covered in beads and jars. She focuses intently on her craft, moving slowly, carefully, and pouring all her heart into the delicate process. Using fine tools, she expertly shapes silver clay and carves patterns while mixing in fragments of magic stone. Clasping her hands tightly over the piece, she channels just a little bit of her mana into the creation. Displaying the finished rose earrings on her palm, Sylvie beams with pride over the charm accessories designed to make the wearer look cuter. The cheerful shopkeeper praises Sylvie as a best-selling creator whose super popular accessories sell out right away, urging her to bring more next time. Thrilled with her success, Sylvie reflects on finally finding the time to make the accessories as part of her slow-life crafting plans. She sincerely hopes these handmade items can serve as charms to give girls a little more confidence. Working diligently at her bench, she playfully admits to having a girlish streak since she never had any luck with romance in either her previous or current life. Glancing at the empty chair beside her, Sylvie wonders if Edgar is skipping today since he worked there the day before. Enjoying a warm drink, she muses that the earnest, justice-driven Edgar has gotten a lot gentler lately, wondering if she successfully tamed him with food. She recalls how annoying it was when he constantly picked fights at first, noting how vastly different he is from his brother, Prince Christopher. Pondering their current dynamic, she notes they are distantly related childhood friends who only truly started talking after her annulment. Smiling brightly beside him, she realizes he might be a genuine friend since he is surprisingly easy to talk to without needing to keep her guard up. Startled by a sudden knock at the door, she contemplates that he might be the first man outside of adventurer acquaintances she can casually converse with, wondering what he thinks. Turning to greet him, she casually points out that he is running late today. As Edgar formally apologizes for his delay, a flustered Sylvie mentally cringes that her greeting made it sound like she was eagerly waiting for him. Edgar suddenly calls out her name in a serious tone. Caught off guard by his sudden intensity, Sylvie lets out a confused sound. Edgar stands rigidly by the door, his expression shadowed with nervous concern. Meeting her gaze, he drops a bombshell revelation that his elder brother was actually under a curse of charm. Thoroughly bewildered, Sylvie demands to know what on earth he means and who could have cast such a curse. Edgar grimly explains the horrifying truth that traces of curses have been discovered all over the castle. He intensely details how the unknown caster unconsciously charmed everyone around her. Sylvie recoils in sheer, wide-eyed shock at the massive implication of his grave words. Standing before an imposing castle backdrop, Edgar reveals that the official investigation report regarding his brother finally came in last night. A flashback shows a younger Edgar reacting with extreme confusion to a startling revelation inside the lavish castle. An older man furiously scolds the seated brother for sneaking off to an unapproved dungeon and getting cursed by a commoner named Katia despite having a fiancée, stunning Edgar with the news that the influence spread to him too. Concluding his grave explanation, Edgar asserts that while further investigation is needed, this terrifying scenario is the most likely truth. The grim truth emerges that Christopher and Lady Katia entered an unexplored ruin for training where she was struck by an ancient demon's curse, unintentionally spreading an aura of charm. A shocked voice denies the reality, revealing that Lady Katia is still currently undergoing intense purification at the temple. Due to his close proximity, Prince Christopher suffered massive exposure and was heavily affected by the insidious magic. The overpowering curse infected the entire castle, forcing royals and servants alike to fiercely favor Katia and seek the total elimination of anyone who posed a threat to her. Reflecting on the unnatural madness, a realization strikes that even the strongest minds grew strangely heated during that chaotic time. This dark manipulation explains why the entire court so easily and blindly accepted the breaking of Lady Sylviana's engagement without a single question. The heavy weight of the past actions hangs in the air as the chilling scope of the magical brainwashing fully sets in. Struck by guilt, Edgar questions his own judgment, finally understanding that his desperate drive to exile Sylvie from the territory was also a direct result of the curse's sinister influence. Gazing into the distance, Edgar mournfully wonders if his brother's eyes had always harbored such impenetrable darkness. A nostalgic memory surfaces showing a brighter Christopher promising to protect the kingdom together, praising Edgar for being more serious and hardworking than anyone. Flashing a warm smile, the Christopher of the past excitedly congratulates Edgar on a job well done. Remembering his brother's sharp eye for potential, Edgar recalls how Christopher was the very first to acknowledge his talent in swordsmanship and magic control, even personally designing his training routines. Filled with regret, Edgar laments not noticing the subtle changes sooner, having never once imagined that romantic feelings were secretly twisting his brother's mind. Trembling with a mixture of sorrow and frustration, the sheer tragedy of the situation shakes the very foundation of their familial bond. Edgar rationalizes that his brother's intense actions initially seemed perfectly natural due to his famously passionate personality. Trapped behind cold iron bars, a defensive Christopher screams that getting cursed despite advancing with caution alongside A-rank adventurers was merely a stroke of terrible misfortune. Trying to maintain peace, Edgar urges his brother to calm down as Christopher desperately justifies that he only wanted to prove Kadia's strength to the royal family. Thrashing against his confinement, the cursed prince furiously shifts the blame by screaming that this disaster is entirely Silviana Mercarini's fault. Standing tall and resolute, Edgar boldly throws his brother's own past lessons back in his face. With unshakable conviction, Edgar reminds the disgraced prince that true adventurers must always accurately judge their own strength before foolishly charging into a dungeon. Gripping the prison bars with trembling rage, Christopher viciously demands to know what Edgar could possibly understand about his plight. The tension between the fractured siblings reaches a boiling point as the cold reality of the dungeon walls presses in. An imposing authoritative figure steps forward, strictly ordering Christopher to focus on completing the dispelling process as his final judgment rapidly approaches. The stern voice cuts through the prince's delusion, commanding him to immediately stop disgracing himself and accept his fate. Edgar watches his brothers unraveling in heavy silence, processing the tragic downfall of the man he once admired. Addressing Edgar, the authority advises him to get cleansed at the temple tomorrow morning just in case, noting that his thin connection to the cursed girl means the effect should already be fading. The harsh memory of the prison confrontation lingers as the truth of the royal family's magical affliction is laid bare. Back in the present, Sylvie absorbs the shocking revelation that a charm curse was directly cast upon Lady Kadia and Prince Christopher. Pieces of the puzzle finally snap into place as she whispers in quiet realization that the magical tampering explains all the bizarre events. Stepping forward with absolute humility, Edgar confesses that under the curse's vile influence, he wrongfully believed she was an enemy and falsely accused her. Bowing deeply with profound remorse, Edgar sincerely apologizes to Sylvie for the unjust pain he caused her back then. The heavy weight of his past accusations hangs between them as he seeks forgiveness for acting as her enemy. Interrupting his somber apology, Sylvie bluntly asks if he was thoroughly cleansed at the temple and is completely free from the curse's lingering influence now. Edgar jolts in surprise at her sudden shift in tone, completely caught off guard by her straightforward question. Clapping her hands together, Sylvie cheerfully declares that everything is perfectly fine then, completely dissolving the heavy tension. She playfully points out the glaring inconsistencies in his past behavior, noting how he seemed odd at the palace and his words didn't match his actions at the farm, especially since he instinctively moved to protect her when the prince attacked. Flashing a gentle smile, she warmly assures him that he must understand by now there is absolutely no need for any further surveillance. Bursting into hearty laughter, Sylvie confesses she actually feels incredibly relieved now that she finally knows what caused everyone's strange behavior. Stunned by her radiant forgiveness, Edgar softly agrees, realizing deep down that there is truly no one as dependable and understanding as her. Closing the chapter on the royal drama, Sylvie firmly states that Christopher must take responsibility for his own reckless actions since he always knew he would one day bear the massive weight of the kingdom. Slumping heavily, Edgar bitterly blames his own dullness for failing to question his brother's erratic actions while Sylvie politely brushes off his guilt. Refusing to let him wallow, Sylvie firmly declares that the prince brought the curse upon himself by obsessing over Kadia and charging into a dangerous dungeon. Conceding her point, Edgar solemnly admits that fixing his brother's deep-rooted issues would be incredibly difficult despite his past desperate efforts. A wistful flashback reveals a smiling Christopher earnestly asking his younger brother to help him protect the kingdom someday. Pondering the alternate outcomes, Sylvie wonders if the prince would have made a true effort if she had warned him about the thorny road ahead. She logically notes that marrying a commoner like Kadia would have required the crown prince to overcome a massive mountain of royal obstacles. Sensing the suffocating tension hanging in the air, Sylvie abruptly decides to shatter the gloomy atmosphere. Tossing aside the heavy mood, she firmly pins the blame on the prince's spinelessness and definitively cancels today's royal tea party. Bursting with vibrant energy, Sylvie aggressively proposes they make hamburgers instead to instantly lift their spirits. Caught completely off guard by her sudden pivot, a bewildered Edgar stares at her in stunned, wide-eyed silence. Commanding him to assist her, she aggressively champions a greasy, calorie-packed lunch while Edgar helplessly surrenders to her bizarre logic. Reflecting on her true intentions, Sylvie inwardly admits she never wanted to ruin Christopher's romance or forcefully override anyone's free will. Curious about her powerful magic, Edgar asks if she ever considered charming his brother, only for her to sharply remind him of their mutual hatred. Radiating fierce independence, she proudly declares that if she ever fell in love she would work for it herself with only minor help from her handmade accessories. Leaning in closely, Edgar teasingly remarks that she is finally making the deeply flustered face of a true maiden. Blushing furiously red, a thoroughly embarrassed Sylvie violently recoils from his unexpected teasing. In a shadowy location, a sinister man with glasses flashes a sly, calculating smile. Handing over a pouch, a shady figure casually distributes a fresh batch of illicit goods. Grasping the mysterious bag, a conspirator eagerly thanks Lord Dryden and tells him to keep up the good work. Smirking with absolute greed, Lord Dryden brags about the incredibly high prices his fake magic stone accessories fetch on the black market. Lurking in the dark, a menacing accomplice fiercely agrees with the highly lucrative counterfeiting scheme. Basking in the bright sunlight, Sylvie cheerfully strolls through the bustling town square. She curiously inspects various magical amulets imbued with unique charms and blessings at a vibrant vendor stall. Clutching her incredibly rare Anything Fits bag, she bubbles with pure excitement to finally deliver her handmade accessories. Throwing open the door, she beams a bright greeting as she steps into the lively shop. Praising her exceptional craftsmanship, the shopkeeper warmly notes that Sylvie's highly coveted items could make her a fortune in any trade. Spotting her arrival, the delighted shopkeeper immediately announces that she came at the absolute perfect time. A distressed cafe lady nervously approaches, holding out an item and begging Sylvie for her expert opinion. Tilting her head in pure confusion, Sylvie wonders what could possibly have the shopkeeper and cafe lady so worked up. Inspecting the crude item, she coldly asks if they seriously believe she crafted these hideous earrings. The worried cafe lady explains she purchased the cheap accessories from a brand new shop on Gruner Street. Dissecting the awful workmanship, Sylvie ruthlessly trashes the poor quality silver and glaringly asymmetrical carvings. Lamenting her lost tips, the cafe lady reveals that these knockoffs fail to generate the generous reactions brought by Sylvie's genuine pieces. She guiltily admits to buying them only because they were falsely advertised as authentic magic-infused charm earrings. Appalled by the shopkeeper's claim that they look alike, an insulted Sylvie viciously demands to know what part of this trash resembles her art. Realizing the horrific truth, she pieces together that the cafe lady sought her out to confirm the blatant forgery. Seething with absolute artistic fury, Sylvie rejects the insulting comparison and proudly defends the careful magic she pours into her real creations. While the shopkeeper sympathetically defends the buyers seeking cheaper alternatives, a furious Sylvie definitively brands the pieces as unauthorized counterfeits. Analyzing the dangerously half-baked magic, she urgently warns that an unskilled caster's counterfeit could violently backfire on the wearer. Clenching her fists with raging determination, she completely absolves the innocent buyers and directs her burning wrath entirely at the audacious counterfeiters. Furious internal thoughts plague Edgar as he suppresses the urge to storm a shop and violently punish the offenders directly. A dark and unyielding fury wells up uncontrollably from the very depths of his heart as he seethes over the sudden betrayal. Panicking at the palpable tension, Edgar begs Sylvie to calm herself while she fiercely denies losing her composure. Shock suddenly washes over Sylvie's face as the gravity of the tense situation finally shatters her initial stubborn denial. Edgar stares back with wide eyes, completely taken aback by the sudden and dramatic shift in her previously fierce demeanor. An intense and icy resolve hardens within Sylvie's sharp gaze as her true, calculating feelings finally begin to surface. Admitting her misunderstanding, Sylvie decides to throw the creepy object away while Edgar quickly agrees with her choice. Regaining her composure, she thanks Edgar softly and assures him that she has completely recovered her senses. The realization sets in that countless greedy individuals desperately want to get their hands on Sylvie's exclusive goods. Hesitant to deliver her new accessories, Sylvie consults a shopkeeper who instantly protests that halting her deliveries would cause a massive problem. Eager customers celebrate the arrival of fresh stock while the shopkeeper happily takes full responsibility to sell her flawless craft without laying any blame on her. Clutching her bag with renewed confidence, Sylvie graciously thanks everyone as Edgar watches her proudly from behind. Staring up at the towering town buildings, the duo contemplates the frustrating existence of fake magic earrings circulating in the market. Strolling down the street, Edgar points out the frustrating reality of knockoffs plaguing popular goods while Sylvie solemnly agrees. Wrestling with the mysterious pull of the villainess, Sylvie reflects on how her boiling blood nearly made her lose herself to pure rage. Clenching her fists tightly, she stubbornly refuses to leave the situation alone because this dangerous problem affects far more than just herself. She vividly imagines how shoddy magic inside a treacherous dungeon could easily backfire and wipe out an entire adventuring party. Fixing Edgar with a piercing and desperate glare, she firmly demands his help in executing her impending counterattack. Burning with righteous indignation, she vows to hunt down the elusive culprit and utterly crush them for their crimes. Tears of rage prick her eyes as she swears to never forgive those who endangered her trusting customers, leaving Edgar sweating at her intense fury. A familiar voice interrupts her seething thoughts by casually bringing up the pressing matter of the magical amulets. The imposing facade of the guild building looms overhead as they prepare to gather vital intelligence on the forgery ring. The master reveals that a concerned buyer already consulted them and the Adventurers Association launched an investigation, prompting Edgar to praise his foresight. Highlighting the opponent's sheer cunning, the master explains the calculated difficulty of tracing the rampant scam goods. Hope glimmers as the investigation team clearly intends to spring a trap and definitively catch the hidden culprit. Suspicion immediately falls squarely upon the notoriously shady operations of the Dryden Trading Company. The room collectively agrees that the Dryden Trading Company most likely orchestrated the entire forgery scheme from the shadows. Rumors paint Dryden Matheson as the ruthless underboss running the town's shady trades and orchestrating most local scams behind the scenes. Dealing with Dryden becomes essential for the town's safety, even though chasing petty crimes usually only nets his disposable underlings. Realizing Dryden likely used penniless craftsmen to make knockoffs and will cut loose before getting caught, Edgar compares him to a Yakuza boss, triggering a memory from Sylvie's past life. Formulating a ruthless plan, Sylvie declares it completely meaningless to just capture the tail when they must aggressively sever the head. Sylvie decides to follow proper procedure by placing a formal guild request to investigate the forgers, leaving Edgar amused that she plans to solve her own problem. Dismissing Edgar's joke about brawling, Sylvie admits that while storming in lacks proof to tie Dryden to the crimes, they must look beyond the small fry. Unshakable determination radiates from the group as they vow to track the forgery operation directly back to Dryden without fail. Emanating a terrifyingly calm fire that cannot be stopped, Sylvie greedily calculates how the massive bounty from Dryden's crimes will far exceed any standard commission fee. Thanking the master profusely, the duo listens intently as he promises the guild will gather vital intelligence on the elusive forgers within a few days. Transitioning to a much lighter atmosphere, they enthusiastically prepare to dig into a delicious, well-deserved meal together. Sylvie marvels at an early summer special tart while warmly expressing her sheer delight at experiencing the 4 distinct seasons. While gossiping locals whisper about a handsome rookie adventurer, the duo criticizes the utter pettiness of a dangerous villain hiding in the sleepy town of Aldi. They grimly analyze how Dryden cleverly balances heinous crimes like human trafficking and fraud to carefully prevent the crown from intervening. They acknowledge that Dryden's sheer cunning has successfully allowed him to remain completely overlooked by the crown's watchful gaze. Savoring her sweet dessert, Sylvie realizes that peddling shoddy knockoffs was a fatal misstep because Dryden foolishly poked a hornet's nest. Shifting the focus of their conversation, Sylvie suddenly breaks the silence by warmly calling out to Edgar. Edgar promises to probe the investigation from a powerful royal angle while playfully wishing his S-rank adventurer companion the best of luck. Looking down thoughtfully, Sylvie confesses her genuine surprise at the fierce intensity of her anger over her hard work being blatantly disrespected. Offering a gentle and appreciative smile, she sincerely thanks Edgar for grounding her and keeping her calm throughout the chaotic day. Edgar confidently assures her she will be perfectly fine while promising to physically pull her back if she ever starts to cross the line. A moment of quiet contemplation settles comfortably between the two as they lock eyes in silent, unspoken understanding. Internally sweating, Edgar heavily doubts his own reassuring words as he realizes he might be completely powerless if Sylvie truly unleashes her unbridled rage. Despite his internal fears, a fierce and uncompromising resolve ignites within Edgar as he decides it is finally time to teach the crime boss a harsh lesson. Staring off with cold, calculating eyes, Edgar openly admits that he has purposely turned a blind eye to Dryden's illicit operations up until this very moment. A terrifyingly dark aura surrounds Edgar as he violently vows to make Dryden deeply regret ever picking a fight with him.